Welcome to Essential Coaching Conversations with Kyle and Asim.
The real, relevant, and necessary coaching conversations to help you navigate coaching, teaching, learning, and life.
Welcome back to another edition, another episode of Essential Coaching Conversations. We have just been, really, really humbled throughout kind of the last few weeks of launching the pod and really just embarking on something that's pretty unknown to both of us. But I feel like we have a lot of practice at it based on what we've been doing with our cohorts and with our community and just having these conversations over and over and over again. But really have been just so humbled by the feedback and by people actually going out of their way to leave 5-star reviews, or in one case a 1-star review. I'd love to know who that was and how we can serve you better, but that is what it is. But really just been an awesome experience, and we're really looking forward to continuing to serving and adding value through this medium.
Yeah, it's really been amazing just to hear the feedback from people, and our idea is, we don't want to just have another podcast out there. There's plenty of those, and sort of what makes people click on this and want to listen to it, and we feel like it is the natural, real, relevant, necessary conversation piece to this, and we hope that this is not class necessarily. We're not here to lecture at people. We've talked about this a ton. If you're familiar with our work, that we don't give answers. We hope to walk people through natural progressions to where they can find solutions that work for them. And I think that speaks to our background as classroom teachers and the way that we would conduct a class. Like, our lecturing is probably a little bit different than a lot of other people in the way they would lecture, and that we're not here to hand answers because we don't have them. If we knew them, we would just write a book and give them to everybody, and we'd make millions of dollars and do all that, and there would be no need for all of this. But I also feel like that would also take a lot of the fun out of this, which is that natural progression and the quote unquote process that so many people talk about. And so we do hope that so far that this has been pretty natural and conversational, and the feedback that we've gotten from coaches all over the country and people who aren't even in coaching, educators and people that don't have anything to do with coaching or education, just in business or firefighters or police work and medical field. I mean, it's really sort of run the gamut, and that's really what we are hoping to do here. And that it just feels like it's two guys having a conversation, and you listening along, you feel like you're having that conversation with us wherever you are. And so it sounds like we've kind of off to a pretty good start. And so hopefully we'll continue to do that. But we thank everybody for the follows, the listens, the reviews, good and bad. Those are great. And so we hope to keep that going.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool, like, being able to have this sort of platform. And I think we actually did it the right way too, not to pat ourselves on the back too much, but I think we had talked about starting a podcast right when, like, from the beginning of when we started Essential Coaching. And I think we actually would have done it probably fairly well, but I think it would have been a lot worse than it is right now, because I don't think we had the practice in recording ourselves and really, like, knowing that we could add value in a medium like this. And it's really cool when, for me, especially, like, when a recruit's parent tells you, hey, I just felt like I was hanging out with you for an hour because I just listened to your podcast, and here's what I took from it. To me, that is probably like the most, I don't know, maybe the most fulfilling moment of the last few weeks, where even if that's just that one person, that's what we always say, right? We want one person to really feel like they're getting something from it. And when they come up to you and say that, and say, like, I literally was just listening to this on the way in for this camp or visit or whatever it is, that to me is probably like the coolest feedback we can get beyond a review or somebody that just kind of types something and sends it.
Yeah, we go back to that foundational piece of why we're here, right? The human component. Our entire vision and mission is to create exponential generational change. And to do that through creating the deepest connected coaching community in the world. And the key word there is connected. The constant, authentic, recruiting of going through our wheel, our human component wheel, over and over and over again. And if you are familiar with any of our sort of EC isms, you hear us talk a lot about recruit everyone every day, and that we want to recruit every stakeholder that we possibly can every single day, if possible, and connect with them in some type of way. Make the next connection. Don't leave hope, up as a strategy. Don't leave it to chance. We want to try to close the loop as best we possibly can. And I think when you get that warm fuzzy feeling inside is when those things come back to you and they feel genuine and they feel authentic. And we'll sort of joke a lot of times, hashtag unsolicited. When we get a great text or a DM or a review or something, when somebody hits you up and says, "Hey, this was really great. This helped me. I appreciate what you're doing." And you're not seeking those things. You're not looking for those things. And again, if you've coached or you've taught, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And they usually come when you need them the most, and they usually come from the least expected places sometimes. But when you get those that are unsolicited, those really are the ones that are special. You'll take one unsolicited over 10, good reviews that you sort of asked your friends and family, like, "Hey, please go smash 5 stars and leave us a review." And, "Hey, go, we just had a really great conversation. Hey, would you please go on Twitter and tell everybody what a great call we just had, so I can help drum up some business." And again, like, that's part of it. And I'm not saying that that's wrong to do, but when you're getting those that are real, genuine, authentic, it tells you that, you're sort of living to your mission statement, and you're doing what you want to do. And so, this is kind of a long intro to kind of where we are so far, through those first couple of episodes, by the time this one likely will go live. But we wanted to just take a minute to thank everybody. If this happened to be the last episode we're doing, we want to take the opportunity to recruit you and recruit you every day, and just say thank you for the support, and hopefully there's more to come.
Yeah, I'm hopeful this isn't the last episode, but I think you hit.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, with the authenticity part, because I think, we can talk about the crowded restaurant all we want, but at the end of the day, like, I think what sets us apart is that we're never going to ask for those things. We've gotten this far without asking for those things, and it would feel disingenuous to be those people that say, "Hey, please, tweet about us," or whatever it is. Like, again, our whole thing is just to be the most deeply connected coaching community in the world. And if we can do that and then create that exponential generational change through that, that's the thanks that, I think we would all feel really good about, that supersedes asking for anything in terms of that. So, no, just really,
Yeah,
really very humbled by that.
If I can be honest for just a second, it's a lot harder that way. I feel, and it's slower. And sometimes again, just being transparent here, like when you're trying to grow something, it is hard to try to stick to that. And I do think we get tested from time to time, where it would be easier just to kind of cast that net and say, "Hey, we'd love to blow this thing up faster. It's taking longer than we thought," or, "We would love to get this particular thing out there," or, even with, like you said, with the just starting a podcast. And it's something that we've talked about for years, and we've had people ask about for years, but it just never really felt like it was the right time. And now that it does. And so I do think that there is something to be said for kind of sticking to your guns there, and quote unquote trusting that process, and sticking to who you say you're going to be, and that reward is there. So if that little message, or can come out of this as an aside, to anybody out there that right now that feels like where they are, they should be further. It's just sort of that reminder, like, it's not it's not how far how much, what am I trying to say here? How far you've got to go. It's how far you've come. Right. And sort of focusing on those little wins that we talked about in the first episode, and stacking those daily. So even if that's the only thing we get out of this particular episode is, hey, sometimes it is hard and difficult to try to play the long game and wait around for the unsoliciteds when it seems like it would be easier. But when you do finally hit those real meaningful, necessary, relevant wins, that they they come back and they do mean so much more. So, with that being said, just to sort of segue into the topic for today about go, 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 let's talk a little bit about slowing down, stopping, resting, recovering.
Yeah. So I was going to say that was a perfect segue into what we were going to
Thank
talk
you.
about today. Those that were wondering, that was not planned. Most of what we do is unscripted and not planned. We have a general idea of what we're going to talk about, and then we just go and see what happens. But that was a perfect segue into the idea that we're going to discuss today, and hopefully sort of raise some questions and maybe thoughts that stimulate your thinking, because they're things that we talk about almost every day in how we as a sporting culture, as a working culture, as an administrative culture, as a teaching culture, what as societally, how we approach the idea of prioritizing rest and recovery. And this is sort of, it could end up being a two-parter, maybe not. We'll see. But I think we have a lot of thoughts and a lot of questions and sort of a lot of maybe just ideas is the right word about how it could look if we were to prioritize rest and recovery. And especially when we think about our sort of essential evolutionary things of connection, speed, health, and engagement. And so if you've been following the chat for a while that we do on Monday nights, you'll know that we're on our Essential Evolution series, and we're sort of deep diving into a particular topic through those four lenses. And so around about the time this one comes out, we're going to be deep diving into rest and recovery through those four lenses. And so I think it's high time that we talk about it, especially from the standpoint of young people. So when I say young people, I think, and Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong or if you have a different opinion about this, but I think we sort of separate sports into like youth sports and then competitive sports. But to me, there's really no difference, right? I think the games are generally the same. It's the pace and physicality, it's the athleticism and the skill level that's different. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do, whether it's right or wrong, which I don't really agree with this, but I think societally this is where we are trying to make quote unquote youth sport resemble competitive sport and resemble higher levels of sport. And so what's happening within that then is that we're on these training schedules that also resemble those things. And so when we get to that point, if we're still trying to differentiate youth sport from competitive sport and where the goal is fun or the goal is winning, like at the end of all of that, the goal should remain the same. And that is to prioritize the well-being of the athlete so they can compete at the highest level that they want to. And so obviously when money gets involved, which that could probably be its own set of podcasts about the money involved in youth sport and developmental sport, I want to say this is probably largely an American issue, but I don't know that to be sure. That we are just seeing the rates of burnout, the rates of, injury, the rates of overuse, of overscheduling of the American teenager as a whole. And that starts really, really early. That starts before teen years. And so, when we think about prioritizing rest and prioritizing recovery, really asking the question, and I'm going to throw this to you and then we can sort of bounce this off each other. But I think it's important that coaches are able to answer the question of how they prioritize speed in their health and recovery. And that's not to say, and maybe we can even back up before that, just prioritizing health and recovery in general, rest and recovery in general, beyond the mandated off day from your governing body and using off days as sort of a treat or a surprise, right? How could we envision prioritizing health and rest and recovery as the baseline or the foundation of how we are going to schedule our athletic performance and our athletic calendar?
So I think there's a lot there, obviously, and not to jump ahead here, but we both read and shared an article from Dr. James Andrews, who I'm fairly certain people are familiar with, the famous orthopedic surgeon, who just, fun fact, happens to be a Louisiana boy, from Homer, Louisiana, and him talking about burnout and the fact that he shouldn't be as busy as he is. He shouldn't have had to make a career off of doing surgery on youth athletes, that are 14 years and under. And in that article, because we sort of joke on here about making made up statistics and whatnot, so I'm going off of this particular um, article, but it was quoted in there that youth sports is a $10 billion industry. So you mentioned money, and so when there's $10 billion up for grabs, and parents out there are willing to sort of pay whatever it is to get their kid exposure or whatever. And just recently, on Facebook the other night, there's little girls that are about my daughter's age who won the state, softball tournament, and they're going to the World Series. And these girls are 5 and 6 years old, which is an amazing experience and great, and lots of life lessons and really great things that are probably coming out of that. But when that's just one particular season in the course of an entire year where they're bouncing from one season to the next, right? And trying to pack in all these different training schedules, and they're just, we've sort of reached this point where there is no off season anymore. And so what are we doing to treat our rest and recovery, like you said, outside of our typical quote unquote off day? Or, you I'm in we're both in college athletics. Division 1 level is different than the D3 level. Your training calendar is completely different than the athletes, at the programs that I work with. And like right now in summertime, it's like 8 hours a week. In season, it's 20 hours a week. And then there's other, stipulations and things and of that nature that, what counts as training? Is it on court? Is it strength and conditioning? Is it film? It's sort of counted as like anything that sort of quote unquote makes you better at your sport. And so you have to go through and prioritize how you're going to handle all of these schedules. And if you're a college athlete, likely you're playing one sport. Some may play more than one, but even that one sport is a year-round job now. There is no off season. And if you trickle that down into high school, you have, kids that play 2, 3, maybe even 4 sports. And it just, everybody's sport's the most important. Like if you're coaching it, and we want that athlete to give us 100% all the time, 110% all the time. Pet peeve of mine right there. And it's just,
Now, you can't, people who are listening can't see this, but I just rolled my eyes so hard in the back of my head. I had to hit myself on the back of my head to roll them back to the front when you said that.
110%. Yeah. So they, you can only give what you have, right? You can only give so much. And if we're constantly asking for 100% all the time, and I know, all gas, no brakes, it sounds great. Like I have a shirt that says it, like I get it. But at some point, like if you don't break, you're gonna run out of gas. Like you can't drive forever. At some point you have to stop and fill your gas tank up. You've got to stop, get a soda, get something to eat, stretch your legs, do something. Like you cannot, on a cross country road trip, you cannot drive without stopping. Like you have to stop. And we just don't build in enough of these rest stops and pit stops in our training calendar, and even in the education calendar, because you mentioned like, well, what are we doing with our off days? So when I coached high school basketball, football, baseball, all these other things were going on. Well, if I gave my basketball guys a day off, guess what they did with their off day? They went to football, they went to baseball. So they weren't really getting a true off day. So then it became like, okay, well, do I never give them an off day? So at least we're working on basketball, because the time that I get with them is extremely limited. So I'm sort of forced with this decision of, I don't give them an off day, but I at least kind of get to control what they're doing. And maybe we play a fun game. Maybe we do some leadership and character development. Maybe we just watch film, or maybe we quote unquote practice, but it's a very light practice, or we build in some yoga or something like that. And so I had to get creative into almost tricking them into taking off days, which weren't really off days. Because again, if they left, they'd go to the batting cage for a few hours, they'd go play the football, they'd go. And when I coached at Simsboro, we didn't have football. That basketball was king there. That's what kids did. So even after a 2.5 hour practice, guess what all of our guys would go do? They'd go down and they would They would hoop at the nearest, you know, blacktop wherever they were. They just never stopped. And part of it, I think, is yes, there are certain kids that really love the game, and maybe they're bored and they got nothing else to do. But there's also that massive amount of external pressure of,
Mhm.
if you're not working, somebody else is. You know, and if you no hashtag no days off, hashtag unseen hours, and the unhealthiness of what those things do, and we create burnout minds, we create burnout bodies. And you know, I coached a girl tennis. She played for 10 years, and she didn't play college tennis because she'd already had a 10 to 12 year career by the time she graduated high school, and she was just burned out on it. And so I it's not to say that you shouldn't do all or nothing. Again, I'm a biology teacher. I believe in balance homeostasis. There's a little bit of a blend, that Goldilocks that we talk about a lot. So how do we sort of balance these things between being committed, building great habits, you know, being where our feet are, all those things, but at the same time taking a step to breathe and allow ourselves to recover.
I think there's so many things that you just brought up that we could just, digress into. But I think one of the big things that you just said that is probably the most indicative, and I think this goes to modeling, right? So we think about like how coaches, teachers, adults in kids' lives model behaviors. The idea of, well, if I'm not working, somebody else is so pervasive in coaching that has no choice but to trickle down to players who then end up becoming coaches. And, we've probably discussed that at length as well, about this phenomena of like just hiring former players as coaches with no formal training, or, not even like no real experience in how to construct environments and how to prioritize and all of those things, which is again why we exist. But if you think about like this idea that like this half hour of film that I could watch could be the difference between us knowing their out of bounds plays and maybe getting scored on in their out of bounds plays. Well, if we reprioritize that and said, hey, for this half an hour, I'm going to be present at home. And I know that I'm going to be present at home. And then I can go and talk to my athletes about, hey, I shut it down last night to be present at home. That is a significantly more impactful model when we're talking about how we can, help young people evolve and how we can serve them. That is far more impactful than saying you're uncommitted because you didn't watch 6 games and I did. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
really messaging to the athlete is saying, hey, if you're not grinding, if you're not doing all of these things that I, as an adult coach who gets paid to do this, does, you're uncommitted and you don't want it as much as I do. And so when that starts at, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, and those kids hear that for the next 10 to 15 years of their life, that's what's going to create those long lasting habits. It almost creates resentment. And when we understand, like when you go and then work that 9 to 5 job and you're not taking work home with you and you're not competing anymore and you don't have that thing to like sort of prevent you from resting, we see this all the time with people. They just don't know how to shut it down, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
go 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 go, to the point then where you see these statistics of corporate burnout. You see like there was the great resignation during the pandemic because people are like, I finally have to rest because something is forcing me to do that, and I didn't bow to the external pressure before, but now I have no choice. And so one of the things that, especially with first year student athletes that come in, and this is advice that I got actually at my freshman orientation going into college, they hand out planners to everybody, right? You have your little agenda notebook and you write in it and stuff. And I'll never forget this. And this is advice that I give to every student athlete that I work with: schedule your sleep. And it's so fun
Right.
because at the time, like, I came from a very, very high performing high school, super like pressure filled environment to go to the 4 year college of your choice. You have to go to college. You have to go to college. You have to go to college. So let's remove this even from the sport aspect right now for a second. The pressure on kids to go to college, the pressure on kids to achieve, the pressure on kids to hit these metrics because somebody else's job relies on you hitting those metrics. That is enough to create burnout just in regular life. And we see that as educators, right? You taught at a very, very high academic private school. I've taught
Yep.
at very high academic public schools. It is the same thing, right? It does not matter who it is. It's the same thing. You got to go to college. You got to achieve this, that, and the other. So when we take these high achievers and we say, hey, you got to achieve in school and you also have to achieve in sport and specialize in a sport very, very early. And you have to dedicate all your time to this for the next 15 years of your life. What do you think is going to happen if we're not scheduling in time to sleep? We're not scheduling in time to let our body recover. If we're not scheduling in time to really take stock of where we are mentally, because rest and recovery isn't just physical, it is mental. And we can see this when we think about school. When you're studying, when you're looking to encode all of those things into your memory and to actually learn those things, you do that when you're in deep sleep. But if we're never reaching that deep sleep, if we're never allowing our tissue to recover, with the overuse, especially as kids are growing, which they continue to do throughout college, we know that. That's documented fact. We run the real risk of actually doing more damage as coaches because we are not scheduling that and forcing that to happen, as opposed to saying, no, we need to do one more rep. We need to do one more than everybody else. We've got to get in the weight room at 5:59 because everybody else is lifting at 6, right? Hashtag unseen hours, hashtag no ceilings, hashtag this, hashtag that. It all looks great on the wall, but your best ability is your availability. Shout out to Adrian Mills for saying that over and over and over and over again to us, right? So that's really what we're talking about is when we're trying to prioritize rest and recovery, starting with that and schedule and having our athletes say, hey, listen, I got 168 hours this week. Where am I fitting in for myself, my rest and my recovery time? And I would challenge coaches to do this because I think their teams would have no idea how to answer that question, nor do I think the coaches would have any idea how to help them answer that question. And if that's the case, now we know where the problem is. We can find the solution.
Mm-hmm. And we hear a lot of, like, was it Kyler Murray's contract? There were like some reports came out that he had to like schedule so many hours of film.
It was 4 hours.
And so it's like, okay, we have to get, we get 20 hours of practice. You have to watch film for 4 hours. We're going to chart, everything's a competition. So we chart everything in our program. We chart everything. We're going to chart our sprints. We're going to chart our shots. We're going to chart it, but you don't chart everything. You don't chart rest. You don't chart recovery. You don't chart how many minutes you spent in warrior two pose while you were doing yoga. You don't chart how much sleep you're getting. You don't chart, maybe you chart how much water you drink. Are you charting how many vegetables you're eating? Are you charting what your meal plan is from a nutritional aspect? Are you charting how much journaling your players do? Are you charting how much time they spend talking to a counselor or a sports psychologist? We can say that we chart everything, but we really don't. We chart what we think matters, and then it shows those priorities show what we think matters and what may or may not. And so if we said like, okay, every week, if you're not getting up 500 shots a day, you don't want to be a great shooter. You think you want to be a great shooter, but if you're not doing this, you're not. But we don't sort of put that same pressure on our athletes by saying, well, if you're not getting 8 hours of sleep, you're not serious. Nobody says that. If you're not eating, however many servings of vegetables and getting protein in and cutting out this and that, then you're not a serious athlete. You're not a serious competitor. How about you compete with your sleep? Compete with your rest. I'm going to beat you by getting better, not just more sleep, but deeper sleep. consistent sleep, because that's another piece to this too. It's getting into those habits and those routines. And you mentioned, going through the education piece of this with homework. If my guys knew that they were going to have tomorrow off, then they would just stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning, catching up on the homework that they haven't been able to do, or playing video games, connecting with somebody online, binging a Netflix show, or whatever, which again sort of defeats the purpose of giving them the off day. We'd probably be better off scheduling a 6 a.m. workout to force them to go to bed. And then when they showed up, did some type of rest and recovery. But they're likely not, even when we do give them those either, whether they're mandatory days off or it's kind of a surprise or whatever, it's not enough to just give them the day off. It's what are we modeling, like you said, to show them what to do with it. And if we competed with no screen time, or we competed with being present at home with our families, and then as the adults in the room, like you said, we're modeling these things. If we don't take care of our business in practice, and we carry some of that work home with us, then we can't be present at home with our families. And then if we can't do that, then likely we're carrying some of our home life back with us to work. And then we can't be present with our athletes or with our students or with our coworkers. And if you do that every single day over just the course of a week, you can start to feel like the anxiety and the pressure that's starting to probably bring up into your mind. Like you might be breathing a little bit faster. You might feel a little flushed. You might notice that you're feeling anxious just thinking about all the things that you have to do. And so, yeah, there are lots of great tips and tricks and journaling and scheduling your day and doing all kinds of things that we can do. But if we're not modeling those things for our athletes, or we don't have somebody in our life to model that for us, which I think is another big piece to this. Who are you surrounding yourself with? Who's in your community? Who are your mentors that sort of help hold you accountable? And if we started to prioritize these things for ourselves, then I do think it would eventually trickle down. The problem is that if youth sports is a $10 billion industry, what is adult sports worth? Mm-hmm. And that's where everything starts to trickle down, and it becomes a very difficult cycle to break. It's very, very difficult.
Well, and so to that point though, like think about the NBA for a second, because I think the NBA gets a really bad rap for this, but I like undeservedly so. And maybe Adam Silver's part of the issue too, because he called out RC Buford, a month ago now about, giving guys the night off and load management and all of these things. And so if the commissioner of that league, that's one of the most watched products in the world, is openly bashing one of his own general managers for prioritizing rest and recovery for their athletes, that modeling too societally creates a major issue, because now people are paying money to go see these guys play and they're not going to play that night. Well, I just wasted my money because I'm a fan of the athlete, not of the team, right? So that's one issue that then trickles down to say, like, well, you can't miss a game because you're so young. You need to get the exposure. You need to get the reps, this, that, and the other. What are those reps really getting those kids? I watched hundreds of games this summer on the road recruiting, and those are not quality reps. They're playing on a floor that's been snapped together on concrete in a gym that is way too cold at 8 o'clock in the morning. And there's probably nobody there watching their game, right? For the vast majority of these kids, there's maybe one coach on their baseline. And they're flying all over the country. They're staying up late in the hotel. Like, that's all part of the experience. Nobody's saying you have to be a robot and shut it down every night and this, that, and the other. I mean, that's part of being a kid and part of having fun with your teammates. Nobody's saying don't do that. But if the reasoning behind why we're playing is to get exposure and to win championships at 5 and 7 years old and to do all of these things, and then you see an organization like the Spurs or the Nets or the Celtics or any of these really, really good winning programs, and they are resting players, that's the model we need to be following. You don't need to be playing 56 games in a summer on these types of courts and things like that, like you'd be better off playing in a playmakers league where it's twice a week for an hour and a half and you're getting quality reps where you actually get to touch the ball and you actually get to make decisions instead of just playing between the arcs in a helter skelter,
Hmm.
game quasi resembles basketball depending on what time of day it is, right? Or football or whatever it is. But we just go from one thing to the next. And I think parents partly, parents got to listen up. It is high time that we start saying no to keeping up with the Joneses because the Joneses are what is burning your kid out. And it's high time that we as coaches, especially college coaches, say, you know what? We're not going to go to those events. We don't need to be there because we've seen you play in your high school season. We've seen you play for the last several years. These live events are for Division One coaches, right? That's why they're live events. And I'm just talking specifically about basketball right now. That's why they are live events. If you know you're not going to play Division One basketball, you probably don't need to go play in that event unless there are schools that you know are going to be there that you have specifically gotten confirmation from that are going to come and watch you play. Right? That's the general statement. Right? There's always nuance to all of those things. But if we can
100%. Right.
part of it, right? If we can cut down that part of it, if we can cut down this idea that 10-year-olds need to go play 80 games over the summer in baseball and they're traveling to these massive youth sports facilities that have 10, 15, 20 fields that have this beautiful Bermuda grass and they're maintained like Yankee Stadium. What we're really doing is creating false ideas in people's heads about what is going to be best for you in the long term and to create those healthy habits. And so you see kids like, I was at an event and there was eighth graders at this event. So how old are eighth graders? Like 13?
13, 12, 13, maybe 14.
And they are covered in K tape. First of all, like K tape is like pseudoscience, right? But if they're wearing it, it means something hurts. If you're in eighth grade and you've got K tape all over your legs and on your shoulders and all of this stuff, what is that going to be like when you're 35? And what's the return on investment of those things as opposed to saying, you know what, like if I have to go and get taped up in eighth grade just so I can play in 7 games this weekend for the purpose of maybe a college coach noticing me, like when you say it out loud, it sounds like a logical fallacy. Eighth graders should be hanging out with their friends, right? You doesn't mean don't play, but go work on your game in a setting that's going to make you better before you start traveling all over the place and subjecting your body to this wear and tear, subjecting your mind to this wear and tear, complete lack of sleep. And then we want to have the conversation about, well, school needs to start later. Well, school needs to start later because our habits really aren't very good. And that's just getting worse and worse and worse as we move through this youth sports cycle or this youth, insert here activity cycle that prevents people from prioritizing rest.
The other part to this is that we as the adults who sort of live with this stuff or put up with it or play along with it, we don't get anything out of it either, though, because all we see are coaches. And again, we're speaking sort of specifically about, basketball in this particular context. So, if you're out there, football, softball, whatever, maybe there's some similarities here. I'm sure there are, but the coaches don't like what they're watching either. We constantly complain about kids aren't competitive. They don't love the game. They don't want to be here. They're sleepwalking. Well, no wonder they're sleepwalking. It's day 3. It's 8 o'clock. You're on court 74. Nobody's there. You're 0-4 in pool play. You got to catch a flight. It's the 5th weekend in a row you play. Like, yeah. And I get to say like, well, if you really wanted to play, you should just sort of toughen it up and kind of, deal with it or whatever. But dude, it's Tuesday. I'm tired. Like it's 2 days into the week. Like I'm exhausted, like we we get run down. You have to pull the car over at some point and rest. And we're not allowing that to happen. And then again, we as the adults in the room constantly complain about the product that's out there. Kids aren't competitive. They don't want to be here, blah, 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 all these things. Kids are soft, back in my day, and it's like, maybe kids would be more competitive. It's just a theory. But if you only got to play 10 games in a summer, maybe you would treat those games as more of that sort of sacred event as we, the adults, want you to. If you only got to lace them up so many times, they would put more emphasis on the moments that you got to compete. But you get to quote unquote compete and play all the time now. Like, it does
Mm-hmm.
not stop. So what makes one game any different than the next one? You know what I mean? And there's not the time built in for not just rest and reflection, but or not rest and recovery, but the reflection piece too. Like, did I play well? Am I getting better? How did we play? What are we going to do? So not only are we just playing a lot, we're doing a lot of the same, and we're not improving. There's not a lot of opportunity to reflect on performances and what we're doing, and even just teaching what our philosophy might be and all those types of things. So we're losing out on opportunities to not just slow things down, but like you said, the reps are so much quantity over quality, where there's not a lot of quality baked in to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, living in Louisiana, football's king down here. And one of the reasons that football has sort of figured it out from the scheduling perspective, there's only so many games. You have to wait
Mm-hmm.
all week long to get for a Friday night under the lights. And so there's so much hype built up into it. There's so much excitement when that finally gets here. And if you've had an off week, you've got 2 weeks to prepare, 2 weeks to, get excited about it. And the whole community's behind you and all those things. But if you're playing in a your third weekend in a row of a tournament, that just sort of the pageantry of it and the nostalgia of it and the excitement and the buildup is not there. It's
Mm-hmm.
why, things like the Olympics and the World Cup and things that only come around 4 years or every 2 years for world championships, there's so much more into those things because we have to wait on them for a while. And that absence, I think, makes the heart grow fonder. But when we are just constantly pummeling these kids with one game, one competition after the next, there's just not a lot of time for them to appreciate what they're competing with. And we haven't even really gotten into this side of the conversation yet about what competition truly is. What is competing? And from the external view, it's the scoreboard, the trophy. Did we win a championship? But if you look at it from sort of the root of compete, it's to come together, to strive together. And the whole reason that we compete against somebody else is not to beat them, but use them as the sparring partner to sharpen ourselves, to make us better. And if they push us and make us better, then they then in return have to level up and they get better. And it's just sort of this back and forth with our quote unquote sparring partner that elevates our holistic game. But if the whole point is just to, win the scoreboard, win the basket, whatever, and we talk about this in playmakers, right? Like, I think one of the misconceptions there is that it's just everybody shows up and has a good time and we don't keep score and everybody goes home happy. And it's like, no, it's very much a competitive environment. We keep score, but we don't keep records. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not about, did you win the basket or did you win the day or win the tournament? It's, did you win your rep? Did you win that particular moment? Were you competitive in those particular habits and your character of the consistency of those positive habits? Are we competing in those moments with our sparring partner, with ourselves? And that, again, that might be a deeper, not to derail us now, but that could be a much deeper topic for another time, and just talking about getting back to the essence of what competing truly is. And I think if we were to do that, then it opens up a lot more space to talk about rest, recovery.